Hello, I am Zara, and this is the story of how I thought I married a prince, only to realize on my wedding night that I had married a man I barely even knew. A man who wore a mask so well that I never saw the monster hiding underneath. It all started with a dream. You know, the kind of love story every girl fantasizes about. I was an ordinary girl from a simple family, and he was a millionaire. Not just rich, filthy rich. The kind of wealth that makes people whisper when he walks into a room. The kind of money that can buy anything, or anyone. But the funny thing about money, it can't buy true love. And trust me, I was about to learn that the hard way. When he proposed, it was like something out of a movie. A private yacht, a diamond so big it looked fake, and words that melted my heart. "Zara," he said, "I want to give you the world." And silly me, I believed him. I thought I was the luckiest woman alive. I mean, who wouldn't? He was charming, generous, and oh, the way he looked at me. It was like I was his entire universe. Or at least, that's what I thought. Then came the wedding. Oh, the wedding. A fairy tale wrapped in gold. Hundreds of guests, chandeliers dripping with crystals, and a dress so expensive I was afraid to sit down in it. I felt like a queen. But here's the thing about fairy tales. They aren't real. And sometimes, the prince turns out to be the villain. Even during the wedding, there were signs, little moments that should have made me stop and think. Like how he chose everything. The venue, the food, even the dress. I mean, what groom cares about the exact shade of white on a dress? But every time I questioned it, he would flash that perfect smile and say, "Trust me, love. I just want everything to be perfect for you." And like a fool, I believed him. Then there were his friends, the way they looked at me, like I was some kind of trophy he had won. Not a woman, not a person, just something to show off. Even his family barely acknowledged me. Cold handshakes, fake smiles. I told myself it was just nerves, that they would warm up to me. But looking back now, they knew. They knew exactly what kind of man I had just married. And then the wedding night came. The moment I had been waiting for. But what happened next? Let's just say, the man I thought I knew, he disappeared. And the real him? Oh, he was about to make his grand entrance. I should have seen the signs. I should have known that something wasn't right. But when you're blinded by love, or at least the illusion of love, you ignore the warnings staring you right in the face. And oh, how many warnings there were. It started small, the little things that seemed harmless at first. He wanted to pick out my clothes, not just for the wedding, but even for casual outings. "I just love seeing you in elegant dresses," he would say with that charming smile. "And who doesn't like a man who cares about what you wear, right?" At first it felt sweet, almost romantic, until I realized it wasn't a suggestion, it was a rule. If I ever tried to wear something else, something I liked, his mood would shift, subtly but noticeably. His jaw would clench. His eyes would darken just for a second. And then he'd say something like, "You don't want people to think you have bad taste, do you?" It was never an outright demand, just a gentle nudge, a disguised command. Then there was his family. The moment I was introduced to them, I felt it. A chill in the air, an unspoken tension. His mother barely looked at me. His father nodded politely but never asked a single question about me. And his sisters? They exchanged glances like they already knew something I didn't. I told myself it was just cultural differences, that they would warm up to me, that I was overthinking it. But I wasn't. The household staff was another clue I missed. They would avoid eye contact when I walked past. Conversations would suddenly stop when I entered a room. The whispers, the nervous glances. It was like they pitied me, like they knew something I didn't. And the way they acted around him, always on edge, always careful. He never raised his voice, never shouted. But there was something about his presence that made people afraid. And then there were his friends. The way they looked at me, like I was some kind of prize he had won. They never spoke to me directly, only about me. "You really got yourself a beauty this time," one of them joked, clapping him on the back. This time. That word stuck with me. I laughed it off then, but now I wonder, what did he mean by this time? I was starting to feel uneasy, but every time doubt crept in, he would do something to pull me back in. A surprise gift, a romantic dinner, a whispered "I love you" in my ear when no one was looking. It was like he knew exactly when I was starting to question things and would act just in time to stop me. I was caught in his web, too deep to see the truth. But nothing could have prepared me for what happened next. The wedding was grand, perfect in every way. A massive ballroom, glittering chandeliers, a cake so tall I needed to crane my neck to see the top. Hundreds of guests, all smiling, laughing, clinking glasses. I was exhausted but happy. This was supposed to be the beginning of my happily ever after. And then, the moment came. The moment I had dreamed about since I was a little girl. When the bride and groom leave together, stepping into their new life. He held my hand as we walked out, guests showering us with rose petals. I remember looking at him and thinking, this is it. I'm finally his. We arrived at his mansion, a place I had only seen glimpses of before. It was massive, a palace in its own right, with golden chandeliers, towering marble pillars, and silence so deep it felt like the walls were holding secrets. As soon as the doors shut behind us, I felt it, the shift. The air grew heavier. His hand, once gentle, now felt different, tighter, possessive. The staff stood in a line, bowing slightly as we walked in. He didn't acknowledge them. He simply led me up the grand staircase, down a long hallway, and into what I assumed was our bedroom. The moment the door clicked shut, something changed. His smile disappeared. His posture stiffened. The warmth in his eyes. Gone. I laughed nervously. "Finally alone," I said, trying to break the silence. He just stared at me for a moment before speaking. "Take off your dress," he said. But it wasn't a request. It was an order. I froze. "What?" "You heard me," he said, his voice calm but laced with something dangerous. I swallowed hard, suddenly feeling like I was standing in a stranger's room. I tried to joke, to lighten the mood. "Aren't you supposed to help me with that?" That's when it happened. Before I could react, before I could even process what was happening, his hand struck me across the face. The impact sent me stumbling back, my ears ringing, my vision blurring for a second. My heart pounded as I touched my cheek, feeling the sting spread like wildfire. I looked up at him, expecting to see remorse, guilt, anything. But all I saw was indifference, like he had just flicked a speck of dust off his sleeve. My breath hitched. You hit me." He tilted his head as if amused by my shock. "And what are you going to do about it?" I stared at him, my mind racing. Was this some kind of test? A sick game? My instincts screamed at me to run, but where would I go? I was in his house, his territory, surrounded by his people, and worse. I had no idea who the real him even was. Tears burned behind my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. He wanted to see me break. He wanted me to shrink, to submit. I took a deep breath, straightened my spine, and met his gaze with fire in my eyes. "You think I'm scared of you?" I said, my voice steady, controlled. He smirked. "You should be." But what he didn't know was that fear and submission were not the same thing. And while I might have been afraid, I was far from broken. What happened next? Oh, he never saw it coming. And just like that, my fairy tale turned into a nightmare. But trust me, this story is far from over. Do you want to know what happened next? Hit that subscribe button, because what I did after that, it's something no one, not even him, expected. I stood there staring at him, my cheek burning from the slap. My heartbeat thundered in my ears, but my mind was crystal clear. This wasn't the man I thought I had married. No, this was a stranger. A cold, calculated predator who had just shown me his true colours. But what he didn't know, what he never expected, was that I wasn't the type of woman to be tamed. The silence between us stretched, thick and suffocating. He was waiting for me to cry, to apologise, to cower, maybe even to beg. But instead, I did something he never saw coming. I laughed, a slow, mocking chuckle as I touched my bruised cheek, tilting my head at him like I was studying him. "You think you're scary?" I whispered, my voice calm, too calm. "That was your first mistake." His eyes narrowed, the smirk on his lips twitching slightly, just a flicker of something. Uncertain. And that's when I knew. He had never dealt with a woman like me before. I took a slow step forward, closing the gap between us, my eyes locked onto his. "You expected me to run? To cry?" I shook my head, my smile widening. How disappointing. I saw it, the brief flicker of hesitation in his eyes. It was small, almost imperceptible, but it was there. He had expected fear, but I gave him something else, something he wasn't prepared for. And that's the thing about men like him. They don't know what to do when their prey doesn't run. He recovered quickly, stepping closer, towering over me. "You have no idea who you just married," he muttered. I raised an eyebrow. "And neither do you." For a moment we just stood there, locked in a silent battle of wills. Then he did something strange. He laughed, a deep, amused chuckle. "You're different," he admitted, tilting my chin up with one finger, his grip possessive. "I like that." I resisted the urge to flinch, and I like men who don't hit their wives, so it looks like we're both disappointed. His smirk widened, but there was something dangerous behind it. "This is going to be fun," he murmured, his voice laced with something dark. And in that moment, I realized something chilling. To him, this was a game. But what he didn't know, I don't lose. The next morning, I woke up to a world that no longer felt like my own. The mansion, once so grand and breathtaking, now felt like a prison. The golden chandeliers, the marble floors, the silk curtains, all of it was just a beautiful cage. And I was locked inside with a man who was more dangerous than I had ever imagined. And I expected him to act differently after what happened last night. Maybe he would apologize or at least pretend to, but he didn't. Instead, he acted like nothing had happened. At breakfast, he sat across from me, drinking his coffee like he hadn't just slapped his new wife hours ago, like we were just another happy couple enjoying the first day of our marriage. I played along, for now. "You're quiet this morning," he remarked, his voice smooth as silk. "Still tired from last night?" I met his gaze, taking a slow sip of my tea. "Number just thinking." He tilted his head. "About what?" I smiled. How quickly people change after the wedding. For the briefest moment, something flickered in his eyes. Annoyance, maybe even warning, but it disappeared just as fast. "You're smart," he mused, setting his cup down. "But be careful, Zara. Smart women can be problematic." I leaned forward, resting my chin on my hand. "And problematic women can be unpredictable." A slow smirk curled on his lips. "I do love a challenge." And just like that, the game began. Because if he thought he could break me, he was in for a rude awakening. And that was just the first 24 hours of my marriage. But what happened next? Oh, he wasn't ready for it. Want to know how I turned the tables? Hit that subscribe button because the real war is just getting started. Days passed, but the tension between us continued to build. Our marriage was no longer a fairy tale, it was a battlefield, where every word was a weapon and every silence was a trap. I wasn't the naive girl he had married anymore. The woman standing in front of him today was no longer terrified of the man who once seemed like a prince. Instead, I was someone who had learned to fight, to stand up, to demand respect. But there was something I knew he didn't understand. I didn't need him to win. I had always thought I was in a fairy tale, but now I knew. I was writing my own story. I wasn't going to be anyone's victim, not his, not anyone's. So here I stood, staring at him across the room, our eyes locked in a fierce battle of wills. He looked at me, his expression hard and unforgiving. But the longer he looked, the more his confidence seemed to fade. "You've been playing a dangerous game," he finally said, his voice deep and cold. "Do you really think you can win?" I stepped forward slowly, my voice unwavering. "I'm not playing a game, you are, and I'm not the same woman you thought you could control." His eyes flickered, his jaw tight. For a brief moment, I saw a flash of vulnerability in his gaze, the kind I'd never seen before. I didn't need to say another word. The silence between us grew heavy, and something in him finally snapped. His hand dropped. His gaze softened just for a moment. And then, it happened. What I didn't expect was that he would finally back down. It wasn't because I had outsmarted him, or because I'd won some grand battle. It was because, in that moment, he realized that the woman he married, the woman he thought he could mold and control, wasn't the woman who stood before him now. I had found my voice, and he couldn't silence it anymore. But more than that, I had learned something invaluable. I was stronger than I thought. He stood there, still in shock, unsure of what to do next. He had expected me to break, to crumble under his pressure, but instead, I did something he didn't anticipate. I forgave him. I stepped closer, and without saying a word, I gently touched his arm. "It's over," I whispered, my voice calm, no longer filled with fear or anger. "We both know it's over." His eyes widened as if he were processing the words. Slowly, the tension in his body eased. For the first time in what felt like forever, there was peace between us. It wasn't perfect, but it was a new beginning. The road to healing wasn't easy, but we both realized that change was possible. I didn't have to stay in a marriage filled with fear and resentment. And he didn't have to remain the man who had used his power to dominate. We worked through the hard parts, conversations that lasted late into the night, apologies that were long overdue, and moments of understanding that neither of us expected. But as we rebuilt, I realized that the relationship I had once feared wasn't the relationship I had to have. We were creating something new, something healthier. No, it wasn't perfect, but it was real. And maybe that's all we really need. As the days went by, I no longer felt trapped in my own home. I didn't feel like I was walking on eggshells, waiting for the next outburst. Instead, I felt a genuine connection forming between us, one built on mutual respect, trust, and yes, love. He started showing me a different side, his vulnerability, his insecurities, and I in turn let down my guard, realizing that our struggles didn't have to define us. They could shape us, but they wouldn't control us. We laughed more, we shared more, and we truly saw each other for who we were, flaws, strengths, and everything in between. It wasn't the fairy tale I had imagined. It was better. Because in the end, the real victory was not in winning some battle. It was in breaking free, together. If you've enjoyed this journey, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. I've shared my story, but I know there's more out there. And trust me, more surprises are coming your way. Stay tuned for the next chapter of my journey.